Twice this week, I was physically required to put my phone face down and away. Once, on Wednesday, when I read that Congress had just passed the largest housing affordability bill in a generation, the kind of legislation that typically takes 30 years to get through, and Trump canceled the signing ceremony to use it as leverage for the voter ID bill. And then yesterday, when the PCE data crossed my screen showing inflation at 4.1% annually, the highest reading since April of 2023, right alongside oil prices hitting $73 a barrel, nearly 35% below their wartime peak. Good news, wrapped in bad news, wrapped in good news. Again, that is this week. Just a little gift. Congress passed the largest housing affordability bill in a generation this week with overwhelming bipartisan support. The bill was designed to address the housing supply crisis that has been building for decades, 30 years maybe. It introduced grants and forgivable loans for home repair, easier conversion of vacant office buildings into apartments because all housing benefits all housing, and a suite of other provisions aimed at the 4 million unit housing shortage that Americans have been struggling with, being strangled by, honestly, for years. Trump was scheduled to sign it on Wednesday, and then he canceled the ceremony, saying Congress must first pass a stricter voter ID bill in exchange for his signature. I'm going to resist the urge to editorialize here because we don't actually need his signature. Congress has the votes that make this bill veto-proof. What I can tell you is this. The bill does not address labor shortages or provide funding for lower-cost single-family construction. So even in its best form, its impact is limited and long-term. The housing shortage is a decades-long structural problem that will take work and time to fix. What the cancellation does signal is that housing, even with its rare bipartisan momentum, is still subject to being used as a bargaining chip for completely unrelated political agendas. All in all, buyers need to understand that there is no cavalry coming to the rescue when it comes to housing affordability. You have to focus on your personal finances and your own economic reality. Then there was the PCE number. Thursday's PCE report showed that the Fed's preferred inflation gauge rose to 4.1% annually in May. That's the highest since April of 2023 and the first above 4% reading we've seen in 3 years. A bummer. Core PCE, which strips out food and energy, came in at 3.4%, which was just slightly above the 3.3% forecast. It's an uncomfortable number on its face, but let's dive deeper here. Economists widely expect that May will mark the peak of this inflation gauge. So, oil prices have fallen to 73.4% a barrel, down more than 35% from their high of this war of $114 a barrel. The energy shock that drove this inflation spike is maybe unwinding. The problem is that it takes time to show up in the data. What we are reading today reflects May's reading. The oil price drop happened in June, which means the next PCE report, dropping July 30th, is definitely the one to watch. There was actually a lot of good news buried in Thursday's PCE report that got overshadowed by the headline number. Personal spending rose 0.7%. Personal income rose 0.7%. GDP was revised up to 2.1% from a prior estimate of only 1.6%. Jobless claims fell to 215,000, which was well below expectations. So the consumer is still spending and the consumer is still employed. That explains a lot of the activity we're seeing in housing markets across the country, which I'll get to in just a second. The Fed's preferred measure reinforced what Warsh said last week. Price stability is the mission. The FOMC's post-meeting statement committed unequivocally to deliver price stability, even if that requires rate increases. Traders have now circled September as the most likely date for the next rate hike from the Fed. In terms of data, this was a tough news week for anyone hoping for rate relief, but the underlying trajectory and how the bond market performed this week was the opposite. With oil falling and energy prices coming down, the war's inflationary impact beginning to reverse, July could be a real turning point for interest rates. I'm personally very hopeful. Plus, we have a market that's moving anyways. In the middle of all this, housing data was off the hook this week. Litty Titty, even. Pending home sales rose 4.8% year over year in May. Mortgage applications surged almost 11% week over week. That's the largest gain since February, when interest rates were in the mid fives. Home sales hit a 5-month high in May, rising 3.2% to 4.17 million annualized, and first-time homebuyers are making up 35% of purchases. Available inventory of single-family homes is back to the pre-pandemic range of 826,000 homes unsold on the market as of mid-June. So let me connect some of these dots for you because I think it's probably the most important thing I'll say this entire week, this entire blog. The Fed is signaling hikes, PCE printed above 4%, the housing bill got canceled, and buyers are showing up anyways. Maybe it's not as irrational as it all seems, though, because remember what Rocket Mortgage said last week? Buyers are responding to their own economic reality. Personal income is up 0.7% this month. Spending is also up. Unemployment claims are falling. Maybe the labor market is doing okay and not breaking in spite of all the AI layoffs. And the people who have been waiting for a political or economic all clear to buy a home are watching their friends with jobs and income and gumption move into their new homes. The confidence tax is lifting, if you ask me, and maybe not because the macro situation is easy, maybe just because people have decided to stop letting the headlines decide for them.